Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in.
Peter Duffy, how are you this afternoon?
Amazing. Doing well. Great to chat to you, Ted.
Yeah, it's good to chat with you too. It's been a long time coming. We had our initial planning conversation. God, it seems like it's been at least a month, maybe more.
It has indeed. It's busy season, which is a good sign in one sense, but glad that we're getting around to having the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into the conversation, I want to get you properly introduced. You've got a pretty popular legal AI newsletter, and that's kind of how our conversation started. And you're very active on LinkedIn, but you started your career in software development, I believe, and you ended up working for Deloitte, and now you're doing consulting around innovation. Tell us, about your background and what you're doing today.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so my background is quite varied. As you mentioned, I'm not a lawyer and find myself in the legal industry. My career effectively has three different chapters. So graduated as an energy engineer, so focused on wind turbines, solar panels, that kind of stuff, but never went down that route. Fell in love with software at an early stage, and in the first chapter, set up some companies and worked with my friends on a bunch of different tech startups. So areas like online advertising, political canvassing, and energy conservation. Realized the most successful of those was the political canvassing, but I realized relatively early that I actually don't have too much interest in politics. So after that, made the jump to the second chapter, which was working with Deloitte Digital. And Deloitte Digital is Deloitte's digital consulting arm. So worked with them for 5 years in Ireland and the UK. And there, effectively, we were helping large corporates in a bunch of different sectors like sports betting, financial services, telecoms, and pharmaceuticals to build and launch mobile apps and web apps at scale. So massive projects. We're talking like over 300 people building a commercial banking mobile app. So really technology delivery at scale. After doing that for 5 years, I decided the route of working within a large consultancy wasn't exactly the path I wanted my life to follow. So I left Deloitte and moved into the third chapter, which is I set up my own consultancy, Titans. So after I left Deloitte asked me to come back. So I started consulting with them initially in financial services, and then they asked to move across to Deloitte Legal, which was a big push in the UK at the time, and still is. They're growing quite a lot. And so effectively for the last 5 years have been exclusively focused on the legal market and helping large legal service providers and in-house teams when it comes to all things relating to legal technology. And these days in particular, that is a heavy focus on AI, there's never been a more exciting time to be working in this space.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. So at Deloitte, do they have a in-house ALSP?
Yeah, so interestingly, in the UK, which was the where I worked within Deloitte Legal there, they effectively have three different strands. So they have the legal advisory, which is kind of like your traditional law firm. Then they have the second strand, which is legal consulting, so advising in-house teams on improving their overall kind of internal operations. And the third one is focused on managed services, so kind of like what people may view as traditional kind of managed services ALSP activity.
Interesting. And we're going to talk about ALSPs a little later, but what really initiated the dialogue between you and I was reading your newsletter. It's number 34 from November. Is that your latest one?
Have had one since then, I believe.
Okay.
But yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah.
So yes, we're talking about that one.
Yeah, that was a really good one. And early on in the newsletter, you published or talked about some numbers that were published by a Wharton study that caught my eye. And some of the highlights that you pointed out were that, and I believe this is, it says legal departments. So I'm assuming this is inside counsel. When you say legal departments, do you remember if that Wharton study was law firms and legal departments, or? I
believe it's just legal departments.
Okay. So I don't have a ton of visibility on that side. So Infodash is an intranet, extranet platform, and we sell exclusively to law firms. Our extranet offering touches legal departments, but we don't have a ton of exposure there. So, but I think there is some commonalities that will really raise some questions in my mind as to the numbers. So, and I think you and I, before we got started here, we talked about some of these numbers and do they make sense? Are they aspirational? And I'm in the camp that a lot of the numbers that come out now seem to be aspirational. Before we jump into the Wharton study, the ILTA Tech survey that came out recently, I don't know, in the last 3 months, the question was not worded the best, but it was basically, do you use AI in business scenarios? And for law firms, the answer varied pretty widely between small and large law. And the way ILTA categorizes law firm size, at the smallest end, it's 50 and under attorneys, and at the largest end, it's 700 and above. And at 700 and above attorneys, the response, law firms with 700 or more attorneys, the response was north of 70% said yes, that they do use AI in business use cases. At the small end, under 50, it was like 20%, which surprised me. I've had multiple conversations with people, and there's lots of ways you could kind of interpret that, but 70% of law firms are not using AI, in at least in production practice of law use cases today. I'm really confident in saying that. Just, it's anecdotal, but we do business with a ton of AM law firms, and I talk to CKOs every day and chief innovation officers, and I know that 70% aren't doing it, at least in big in big rollouts. They may have little pockets of experimentation and those sorts of things going on, but I think those numbers are deceiving. I saw another number, and I forget who pushed this one out, that like something like 15 or maybe even less than that, maybe it was low teens % of law firms have an AI use policy. And I was like, okay, well, that's pretty scary. If 70% of big law is telling you that you're using AI and less than 15% have a policy around it, that's a real problem. I think the reality is that the number is actually closer to 15% that are actually using it in a material way in practice of law scenarios. Is, marketing and KM using, Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude? Yeah, that seems reasonable, that 70%, but not. I still think we're in an experimentation phase in legal. What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, firstly, I totally agree with you in the experimentation phase. Like, we're still in the early days. The technology has kind of only been available to law firms for a short period of time. And if you factor in the time it takes for the procurement cycle to law firms to actually buy technology, that it's only been a very short period of time where people could start using it internally. To your point around, is 70% usage sound high? Oh, it sounds high, right? That's the good feel is that sounds very, very high. And as you say, there's a lot to the wording of questionnaires within surveys. And I'm always have a healthy dose of skepticism for any survey I don't administer myself. And more broadly, when it comes to surveys, any individual survey, you can get interesting, broad data points. In isolation, there's minimal value. But when you look at, across a bunch of surveys, you can start to see interesting trends at again, with the caveats that, like, how the questions are worded, what qualifies as use. There's a whole heap of nuances with every question and with every survey. So as a gut and sense check, yeah, I'd be more inclined to say, if you were to ask me, is it closer to 15 or 70? I'd say it's probably closer to 15 for material impact that is being regularly used. But there's always caveats in that. As you said, that there will be pockets within any given legal service provider or within corporates who have substantial uses. So it does vary quite a bit. But I think whenever people see or hear very large numbers and very high adoption, they should have a natural skepticism at this point, because we're still in the very early stages.
Yeah. Agreed. And the Wharton study that I was referencing here that you provided a little bit of clarity around, it said that 69%, and it sounds like this is inside counsel, are using Gen AI at least once a week, and that 66% think it has a high or medium impact. And I looked at kind of the inverse of that argument, and really looked at those who said it would have a low impact, which was 25%, which is a real head scratcher for me, right? I mean, yes, the majority think that it will have at least high or medium. Only 28% said that they think it's going to have a high impact. So when I look at those two, in the middle, it's not as interesting, but on both extremes there, I find it interesting that only 28% think it's going to have a high impact, and that 25% think it's going to have a low impact. Like, I can't wrap my head around what's going on there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because in this study, there's a few different ways you can look at it. One is around the percentage that use it regularly. And one of the main takeaways is that within the various departments in a corporate, legal is amongst the lowest / potentially the lowest when it comes to adoption of Gen AI. So that in itself, it sounds broadly correct if we think about, well, lawyers, the nature of the work that they do, the importance of being, totally accurate in the work that is produced. It's natural that they would have lower usage than sales or marketing or other departments in the enterprise. Then when it comes to potential impact, that's an interesting one too, because the question is phrased as expected impact, which is a future prediction. And the thing is, people are often very bad at predicting the future, especially if it's new technology, which they may not fully understand or comprehend the potential impact. That my takeaway from this, firstly, it's great that there's already 28% of these respondents are expecting that it will have a high impact, and another 39% are expecting a medium impact, because that shows those who have appetite to start using, or who will be easier to start adopting and really driving value in what they do. So I would look at that quite positively and see, okay, it takes time for any technology to become embedded or adopted, or people to kind of understand what's coming through. To show that people are already expecting quite a large impact is a positive sign, and that there is appetite and recognition broadly from the majority that this will have an impact in how legal is kind of delivered within the corporate.
Yeah, you're a glass half full kind of guy.
Yeah.
I look at this and go, what are the 25% who think it's going to have a low impact thinking? Like, do they have their head buried in the sand? Do they not read? Are they not going to conferences? Have they not experimented? Because there's no way that it's going to have a low impact on the legal industry. If you were to stack rank industries that Gen AI is going to have the biggest impact on, legal is going to be near the top of that, in my opinion. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the head scratcher. Like, man, and I guess it's easy, for me to say this. I own a legal technology company. I'm in it neck deep. And the reality is, if you look at the demographics, especially in law firm leadership, it skews older, right? And maybe people towards the end of their careers aren't investing time in learning about it, because I guess they figure maybe that by the time it gets here and has a real transformational effect, they'll be, in Florida on a boat somewhere. That, I don't know, that may have something to do with it too.
Absolutely. And you raise a very good point. Look, we're at the forefront of what is happening here. You are running a technology company. You are selling to those who, are already of the mindset that technology is having a big impact. And likewise, the people I deal with are clients who get it, who are already moving fast and want to move even faster. So I firmly believe that AI is going to have a massive impact on legal. And when I see that 25% perceive it will have a low impact, I believe that they are incorrect. And I believe that just highlights that is the area that we'll have to be more mindful of when it comes to adoption and when it comes to implementation. But I think their view is probably incorrect. We just have to manage that as this change comes through. And it kind of ties on the part that, like, look, within the industry, everyone's at different stages of the maturity here. It's a very broad market, and there's a huge change management piece when it comes to the introduction of AI. And I think for me, it highlights that we need to be mindful that there is a cohort of people who do not think that this will have an impact. And that's something that people need to be careful of when introducing technology, that people element.
Yeah. I don't think they should be in law firm leadership. I mean, I really feel that strongly. If you have someone who does not fully grasp the potential and likelihood of the transformational effect of AI in the industry, I don't think they should be leading your law firm. But the reality is, I don't choose who leads these law firms. And what's interesting is, I don't know how this works in the UK, but here in the US, a lot of law firm leadership comes to be because they're the best at lawyering, right? It's not because they're the best leaders necessarily, or, they've got the best resume to lead the firm. It's, because they've been most successful, building a book of business, and there's value to that. But, in other industries, like you mentioned, financial services, I spent 10 years at Bank of America. It's a different model in big corporate organizations, that, especially if they're publicly traded, or they have a board, a fiduciary board that, that management is held accountable to. There's no such thing in law firms, at least in the US, right? There is no board. The owners are partners and they work in the business. So there's no kind of third party objective, arm's length relationship between a board that puts management in place with very specific criteria. And I think that impacts the ability for law firms to really grow to their full potential, right? So the biggest law firm in the world is K&E. They're just under the floor of the Fortune 500. They're all private in the US, right? So there's no publicly traded law firms. There can't be. But if there were, there still wouldn't be any in the Fortune 500. And if you were to ask, well, why? There's other professional services organizations in the Fortune 500. Why not legal? I would point to that model as one of the reasons why. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you make a very valid point that fundamentally the incentives and the structure of law firms make a lot of things hard. And where we see alternative structures, I've seen quite a bit in the UK, and I will say as well, with the caveat that Titans, we're in the very fortunate position that the clients that we work with, they think big and they want to move fast and they get it. So we're not in the business of trying to tell executives that this matter. Executives come to us and are like, we know this really matters. Let's go. So that's a lovely position for us. I think that for the overall structures, where I haven't seen it, where it is different in some cases in the UK, for example, one of the law firms I worked with for numerous years, DWF, they were the largest publicly listed law firm in the world at one point. They're now private equity owned. And in general, we're seeing kind of private equity are making larger moves in the legal service market, and not just in the UK, but elsewhere. And the thought process there and the incentives are very, very different to what we see with law firms, when it's not ultimately just about, say, the profit per equity partner or whatever it might be. It's the overall, what is the value of the business? And it's interesting that does drive different incentives. And it'll be curious as we see that become more common within legal, how that may change things.
Yeah, and things seem to be trending in that direction here too. There are certain states like Arizona, for example. There are others. I think Utah might be one, where they are allowing non-lawyers to have an ownership stake in law firms. And I think that will change significantly. I think that will improve the organizational design and structure within law firms, where, again, just because you're the best at lawyering doesn't mean you should be the CEO of a law firm. And I think when you bring outsiders in and you put professional management in place that understand how to grow and scale a large organization, good things will happen from a growth perspective. So we're just now starting that journey in the US, but I know you guys are further ahead. That's already happening or has happened in the UK, correct?
Yeah, it's actually happened for quite some years. I think it was the Legal Services Act. I can't remember exactly what year it came in, but that effectively made it a lot easier for non-lawyer ownership of legal service providers. So the likes of the Big Four, who have a large presence in the UK for legal services, that that has an impact on the market. And even if we think about kind of ALSPs more broadly, that in the UK, most of the, say, top 50 law firms will have an ALSP arm that, will help with consulting or potentially do some managed services or other pieces like that. So it does introduce new potential delivery models. And I think it's something that I know that in the US, there's hesitation for the non-lawyer ownership, but it seems like a no-brainer. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. It just makes sense. And this is maybe controversial perspective, but honestly, I think a lot of this is ego in the U.S., right? Lawyers think they're special sometimes. Like this, they say we're a business or a profession, not a business. That's nonsense. You're both, right? And I've talked about that before. Every profession is a business. Not every business is a profession. But when you look at the criteria to be in the legal profession, it's not that unique. It's like doctors do the same thing. They have, exams, and they have to go through residency. There's all sorts of things, and there's plenty of outside investment from non-medical professionals into the medical field, and you've seen things grow substantially. So I think a lot of this is, if we're being candid about it, a lot of it is ego, inflated perspective of what they do. Yes, it's important. And yes, the stakes are high. Is it higher than in the medical profession? That's a hard no for me, right? If I got to decide between life or death or having a bad legal outcome, I'm gonna choose that. I'm gonna choose life and figure out how to deal with whatever the legal situation is that I'm in. So I'm hopeful. It does seem like that is changing too. Like, you see the ABA has now, there's a push. I can't remember if they actually adopted this or not, but the American Bar Association to deprecate the terminology around non-lawyers, right? Because it seems it can be perceived as condescending. I don't really have a strong opinion on that one, honestly, but I know a lot of people do. So I think there is a push in that direction to make this less, you're not that special because you have a JD and you practice law. It's like, yes, what you do is important, and what other people do in other industries is important too. So we're getting there. I think we're just a little bit behind for those reasons.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Look, every job is important, and lawyers are no more important than any other professions or any other industries that are there. I think that, and again, without the nuanced understanding of some of the US landscape around what is prohibiting it, but at a very basic level, look, it's a form of protectionism in that it is preventing external players from coming in to a market that is massively lucrative, where you have owners of business making millions and tens of millions every year. That's obviously a business,
Protectionism. And I listen, I'll be honest. If I was in that position, I would probably have that same perspective, right? Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. It's not an irrational thought process. And I want to be clear on that. I sell to law firms and lawyers, and I don't mean any disrespect by it, but that's the way I see it. So, you and I talked about, this is a great conversation. You and I talked about the challenges around ROI measurement with AI. And, we had our planning call a while ago. So when I wrote this agenda, I have a note in here that says PwC data showing limited productivity gains. Normally I include a link so I can go back and look. I didn't in this scenario, so I forget. I read so many studies. They come out so rapidly these days. Like, I don't have this one memorized, but I do remember seeing the data that showed that ROI is challenged right now. What is your perspective on measuring it and managing that?
Yeah. So firstly, on the survey point, as a refresher, so it was a PwC survey of the top 100 law firms in the UK, and it was exploring whether productivity gains have been monetized by the use of Gen AI. And outside of the top 10, there was 0% of respondents had monetized productivity gains, and within the top 10, instead of 17%. So overall, the broad message is close to nobody has monetized the productivity gains that they may be seeing through Gen AI. And there's one part of me that's not surprised in that, as we mentioned earlier, we're still in the very early stages of this, and we can't expect to be, monetizing everything extremely quickly. Especially if you factor in, look, the tools themselves are expensive to start using, to start rolling out. It's a big effort to get them into any particular firm. And at this point, where people have kind of started off in their experimentation R&D phase, was things like general AI assistants or chatbots that could help with very discrete, specific tasks in a much broader workflow that it may be addressing. So if you're just helping with very small pieces of a large workflow, it's hard to get tangible ROI on that. You can certainly get loads of benefits in that it's reducing drudge work, improving the lives of those who are actually using the tool, etc. But until you start kind of expanding along a workflow and start to have a greater percentage kind of impact on the set of tasks that are part of that workflow, it's a lot harder to see that tangible ROI for the work that is being completed. As well, we need to be aware, as is always the case within legal, with the billable hour, that if we're looking around kind of the monetization of the benefits, well, if you're just cutting down your billable hours, how are you monetizing those productivity gains? So there is that question around, okay, well, what is the pricing model here? How are we actually benefiting commercially from the activities that we're doing? And we're definitely still in the early stages of that. So I'm not surprised to see that very few people can honestly say that they're seeing monetary productivity gains at this point.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. We also talked about balancing the hype and reality, and I feel like there's a lot of hype right now. And man, I feel like I sound like Debbie Downer on this episode, but Mr. Skeptic, and I am naturally skeptical, but I'm actually extremely bullish about AI, and I think it is going to be amazingly transformative everywhere, not just within legal, but it already has been for me personally. So I'm very bullish overall, but I see so much hype. There was a legal IT insider, I think, kind of a case study with Clifford Chance on Copilot, and Copilot's another situation where I know in the long term Microsoft's going to get it right. They're too invested to not, but right now it's not. It needs work, and but this case study really paints this picture that is not in line with reality from my perspective. And when they talk through use cases, the first use case they mention is the big use case is cases are summarization, where, for example, people are in a big email chain and want to summarize it to give a report to the client. And then it says, dash, all of the output will obviously need to be checked. Well, then where's the hell's the ROI? If I got to go read the damn thing to make sure that the summarization that it wrote is accurate, I don't need the summarization. So scratch that one off the list for me. Now, this is how I see it. I do think there is value in summarizing Teams chats and meetings and email threads, but you can't use it to summarize on a high risk communication, right? Like, let's say back and forth with clients, and you're just jumping in the loop, and you're an attorney assigned to a matter. Don't use Copilot to go summary. There might be details in there. There probably are details in there that it might miss. So, I think that there's just a lot of hype right now, and the marketing engines are at full speed. And I think there's a big gap between what the marketing is pushing out in the marketplace and what these tools are actually delivering. Do you have the same perspective, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, firstly, your point around the default skepticism. So I when it comes to AI, I try to balance it as well. So there's one part of me that has a default skepticism of any claims or hype or any kind of articles I see coming through, for sure. There's the second part that is incredibly excited by this, that the tangible benefits I'm getting in a day-to-day basis and what I'm seeing with some of our clients are phenomenal. So I do balance those two different hats. When it comes to Copilot specifically, yeah, so as you mentioned, some of the main use cases that people are getting benefit from are like using it with Teams, transcripts, summaries, that type of stuff, or kind of catching up on some emails. They're the main ones. For Copilot impact on actual legal advisory work, like say working with contracts, that kind of stuff, it's not there. From broadly speaking, it's not at that level. People are definitely getting benefits from certain tasks that they complete, because one level, it's a safe way of accessing AI and it's a safe way of accessing the models. And within that particular case study, one of the things that they had referenced around the selection of Copilot is that it's a form of risk mitigation. That people would be using Gen AI in some form, whether that be their personal account with ChatGPT or something else. So at least if you can provide them with a secure, safe, relatively cheap access to Gen AI, okay, you may say $30 per user per month is expensive when it's gone across a whole firm. But at the same time, in the Gen AI world of the pricing of vendors, $30 per month per user is very, very cheap. So in that sense, I see the value there. But if the question, if you think about what is the tangible impact on actual substantive legal work, it's probably limited, which is the case at the moment, I think, across the board in many cases, because again, we're still kind of just tackling small little tasks or within broader workflows. That is starting to change. And I think it is good to have a healthy balance of skepticism versus what we see kind of out there. I'm definitely seeing scenarios and cases where Gen AI is having a massive impact on work. In particular, what I see around the kind of the contracting space, with whether it be pre-execution or post-execution work, that there is massive tangible benefits that are happening. Oftentimes, those benefits aren't the ones that are in the headlines or are being talked about. So yeah, it's a mixture of, I think a lot of talk out there is talk. However, at the same time, there is meaningful benefits that people are gaining as well.
Yeah. We're probably not that far apart. I've gotten a little frustrated, if I'm being honest, like, especially in the Microsoft world, they have this most valuable professional program, MVP, which is based on when you get an MVP designation, basically it's how much of a Microsoft fanboy are you, right? How big of an advocate have you been? How have you and people buy into this. Like, I'm not going to say any names, but there are several on LinkedIn that talk about Copilot like it is the best thing ever. And all these, there was even a 10-day replace Google with Copilot for 10 days. That's like replacing a spoon with a hammer, right? Completely, they don't do the same things. They're not the same tool. The same use cases don't apply. But all of this, so it's not even just Microsoft. It's people out there wanting to get traction on their new YouTube channel. There's several YouTube channels that are zeroed in with Copilot. And again, it's not that I think Copilot is awful. It's just, it feels like an early beta. And I think if it were $5 a month right now, I think it would be fairly priced. At 6 times that, I don't think the value's there. But you bring up a good point about the safe path. And they do have the controls in place. They actually have too many controls in place, because Copilot doesn't even access, when you're drafting an email, for example, it does not look at the large corpus of data that it has sitting in Exchange to look at how you normally communicate. And they're waving the flag of, because we don't want to store any of your data. It's like, wait a second, you do that data is in your data center, like you already store it. So I think the ring fence is a little too tight right now, and I know they're going to fix these things, but yeah, I'm frustrated with people out there pushing this and not telling the whole story. So I guess that's why I got a little bit of a edge when I talk about it, because I know it's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. Like, it is perfectly positioned over the Microsoft Graph and all of the massive amount of data. Law firms actually keep very little data in SharePoint, and our platform is built on SharePoint, so I know that well. But they don't keep much interesting. There's like things like policy documents in there, policies, but they're project documentation. But they big law firms don't keep work product in SharePoint. I wish they would. It would be great for us, but that's a whole nother topic. I don't see SharePoint as a large law DMS anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think, again, kind of finish off on Copilot. So, as you say, look, it's going to get a lot better. At the end of the day, it's hard to bet against Microsoft. They have, like, every large law firm is a customer of Microsoft. Lawyers live in Microsoft Word. So when it comes to distribution, safety, just reliability, if you're a CIO, it's a relatively easy and safe choice to go with Microsoft Copilot at this point, especially if you want to get GenAI into the hands of your people. And firms are facing pressure to do so, because there are clients out there who are demanding that AI is used to help, reduce the cost of legal services, either now or in the future. Or, for example, I've seen RFPs which are very clear. Like, what is your GenAI strategy and how do you intend to pass on these savings to clients? So there is an AI mandate, both within law firms and within the enterprise world, of teams need to be doing something with AI. And so if you're a technology executive making a decision to get AI into the hands of your people, it's not a bad choice. In that way, if we think about the actual impact it's having on the day-to-day, in certain use cases, questionable. In others, it probably is having impact. But there's a lot of sound logic in people making this choice as well.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into what we were going to talk about next, which is kind of best practices for AI implementation and adoption, right? Like, I've been an advocate of starting with business of law use cases because the risk reward balances out better there. A very high impact on the practice of law side, also very high risk. You got client data to worry about. You've got attorneys who have very low tolerance for missteps. So if things don't work right when you put it in front of them, it's really hard to get them back to the table sometimes for round two. So I advocate for have your KM department, innovation teams, your finance teams, your marketing teams, your HR teams, start to use it there where the risk reward balances out much better as an incremental step towards eventually, obviously, the biggest bottom line impact is going to be in the practice of law. But what are your thoughts on kind of starting small and controlled rather than doing full enterprise rollouts?
Yeah, I totally agree. And when it comes to implementation of AI, I think about three different things. Firstly, starting small and hand-holding a particular group that you focus on. Secondly, is getting very specific on the use cases that you're looking to solve, not just to push the AI out there for the sake of it. And thirdly is setting expectations. Because as you said, if you lose that trust with people, it's hard to regain it. And when we deploy AI with clients, that's one of the things we really focus on is appropriate expectation setting. And with the introduction of any tool, it's not just here are all the things the tool can do. It's being super clear on this is what it cannot do. If you try and use it for these use cases, it will fail. You will get bad results. You will get frustrated. And just being super transparent with people. And, touching on the hype piece that there's, some talk in the market about AI being magical and what it can't do, etc. However, if you go in with that attitude, you will fail for sure. It's not at that level for the vast majority of use cases. Whereas if you frame it out, look, this is like having a junior associate, or in certain cases, even a mid-level associate that can support with the work that you complete, that they will make mistakes. It's not perfect. It needs your input. And that's actually a far better change management piece as well, because from the lawyer's point of view, it's very clear, look, this is not replacing them. This is augmenting how they perform the work. So yeah, expectation setting is a massive one. And then, as I mentioned about getting very, very specific, it needs to be tied to a very clear use case, that the benefits are very tangible, that it's clear what the objectives are and what you're trying to achieve, and just having that in a kind of contained environment. And by contained, I mean structured. This is how we are going to approach it. Here's how we check how, the feedback as we progress. Here is how we iterate as we go. Just overall delivery best practices, change management best practices, start small, expand, learn, get some proof points, and then go broader. When that approach is taken, I've seen marvelous results. However, people need to be mindful that all the standard best practices we would have with any technology implementation, they still are true. You still need to do all the good stuff you would do before. AI just doesn't remove the need for traditional change management and delivery experience that you would have with any technology.
Yeah, that's a great point. To the extent that you're able, what are some specific examples of AI use cases where you've seen good success?
Yeah, sure. So what I can speak to, a lot of the work that we focus on involves transactions and contracts. And within that, if we think about the kind of contracting workflow, two of the kind of broad areas, one when it comes to pre-execution and the review of contracts against specified playbooks. That use case can be really, really good. And conceptually, that can apply in many other cases, because effectively you're just taking a set of rules or a set of principles and applying it against a body of text. That can be used in many different areas of the business, but that we have seen really, really good results. The second one is for the post-execution bulk review of documents. So tasks that would traditionally have been used with some of the classic machine learning vendors, also seeing really good results with Gen AI providers in that type of activity. And part of the reason for that is because whereas with machine learning, we'd just be identifying relevant passages of text for people to then review and interpret, with Gen AI being able to not only just identify the text, but actually interpret it and, say, answer a question or get a specific result, not just a control F, but going a couple of steps further in that process. And the efficiency gains for both of those can be remarkable when done well.
Interesting. So you and I also talked a little bit about what I call innovation theater, which is I didn't coin the term. I can't remember his name now. Guy from NRF put it. It's in Colin Levy's book, and he talked about innovation theater, and it was steps to being innovated. Step one, don't be a law firm, which is hilarious. But there is a concept of innovation theater where there's a lot of I think this is changing too for the better in a big way since November of 2 years ago. I think that the market has seen the industry, the buyers of legal services, as behind the curve on technology, and rightly so. Law firms are behind the curve. If you compare law firms, I've spent a ton of time, 16 years in legal and 10 years in financial services, and there's no comparison. But the response to that initially was, hey, let's create a chief C-suite with innovation in the title. And that was the initial response. For some, there are innovation teams out there that are doing really good, amazing work here in the U.S. I'm sure it's the same way in the U.K. And I don't know what the ratio is. I would totally be making a number up, but there is this concept of, I call it innovation inflation, where the number of titles with innovation are exploding. So what is it different in the UK? Well, I guess two questions do you see kind of that same exponential growth in innovation roles? And is the amount of innovation work proportionate to that growth, or is there a gap there like there is in the US?
So on that, I think the UK has actually been ahead of the US for quite some time when it comes to innovation and legal tech within law firms. Um, and so I entered the legal market 5 years ago and was working with innovation teams immediately and have been since then. And some teams in the UK are massive. So you have the likes of Adult Short Goddard, who have like 70 plus people in the UK within their innovation and tech teams. So it's quite formalized in the UK, and most of the larger firms will have those teams. And they, for the ones I've interacted with, doing a lot of great stuff. Don't get me wrong, it is hard to drive innovation and change within law firms. Just if we factor in, with lawyers trying to get their time, the billable hour, all the incentives, it does make stuff hard. It is much easier now with AI when when the lawyers have appetite and interest to get more involved. In terms of the growth of innovation, so I haven't seen much change in that. Like it was already I'm sure it has grown, but the default in the 5 years I've been involved has been like all those large firms have innovation teams. So it's not as if it's a new concept for them. It's something that was being certainly quite active in the last 5 years. In fact, firms would often have, you might have a specific innovation team, also having a specific legal tech team, also having a knowledge management team. So the UK, I think, looking across the globe, has traditionally been one of the most advanced when it comes to legal innovation teams within law firms.
Yeah. So if you look at a pie chart, the slice of pie of firms that are engaging in innovation theater, that slice is getting smaller and smaller, especially in the last 2 years, because it's no longer an option to fake it till you can make it. It's, you need to be investing in this now. That's really been the challenge, I think, has been around investment. Law firms, and I'm using broad brushstrokes here, there are many, many exceptions to this, but law firms have really tried to not always looked at technology as strategic, more of a necessary evil and a cost that needs to be managed. And that has really shifted in the last 2 years. And I can't tell you how happy I am about it as a legal tech company. And just somebody who works in the industry, man, it's just really good to see the mindset growth. Have you seen the same shift over there?
Totally. I think that the mindset to technology has really changed, and that, like, even if we think about the data points of the appetite of lawyers within law firms and their views on technology, having worked within innovations and tech teams directly embedded within law firms and trying to get engagement from different practice areas, it is often a challenge. However, with the introduction of AI, that's really flipped that on its head, where AI brings lawyers to the table. AI may not always be the correct answer, but at least you have them at the table. Right. And now you can point to something else on the menu, whether it be document automation or, even just using the DMS property or whatever it might be, but you have their attention or their time and interest, which is a massive change.
Yes.
And so it is now an incredible moment to be working in legal, because we have both the technology in the AI and the interest of the end users. Whereas a couple of years ago, we did not have the interest of the end users, and we did not have this technology that is, coming through as well. Yes, we had a bunch of different technology that's incredible for different use cases and just general automation, but now we are really at a point where we have that desire for change. So it's incredibly important, as you mentioned, managing expectations and not blowing that trust that we have and that interest that we have, because if you do so, you lose you lose people for another couple of years.
Yeah, they say that trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. And that really matters, because, like you said, getting them back to the table would be an uphill battle. Well, we're just about out of time here, man. This has been a great conversation. We didn't get through half the things we were going to talk about here, but I'd love to have you back on. I think your newsletter is outstanding, and I highly recommend. I'm going to give you a shameless plug here. I think it's great. I think folks should, who are interested in the topic, of AI and legal should absolutely check it out. How do people find you and your newsletter?
Sure, absolutely. So for the newsletter, people go to legaltechtrends.com, there's the option to sign up there and links to the previous edition. So we're now nearly at 3,000 people. So really appreciate the feedback. It's going down really well. And in particular, what's nice is that like the readership is a lot of technology decision makers within firms and within in-house teams, which is quite nice. And then for people who want to find me and what Titans do, you can go to titans.legal is our website, or find me on LinkedIn as well, just Peter Duffy. There's plenty of Peter Duffys. It's actually an incredibly popular name worldwide. But if you put Peter Duffy and Titans, I'll probably pop up.
I don't have that problem, Ted Theodoropoulos. There's a few, but not many. Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you spending the time. I look forward to reading more of your stuff. And again, I'd love to have you back sometime in 2025 to talk more of this stuff. It's been a really fun conversation.
Absolutely, anytime. Massive fan of the podcast. Always listening to it. So I'm for sure happy to come back.
Awesome, good stuff. All right, well, have a good rest of your afternoon and a good holiday.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfodash.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfodash to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Infodash.